and we've all been through this, is, you have a big inspiring kind of event like that, and then the question is, well, 6 months later, where are we? What's going on? So we felt some need to try something. Let's get something going. Let's start somewhere.
This week on the Truly Modern School podcast, we begin a two-part mini-series titled The Core of Innovation. Bill, who are we going to be speaking with?
This week we're going to chat with Don Macpherson and Paul McKenzie. Many of you will know Don and Paul. For those of you who don't, they'll introduce themselves early on in the podcast. Don and Paul have lots of strong ideas as far as taking 21st century needs, 21st century skills, and putting them into action for the good of students.
All right, let's take a listen. Today we're hanging out at the Ed Center at the Thames Valley District School Board headquarters, and we're joined by Paul McKenzie and Don McPherson.
And officially, Paul and Don are both superintendents of student achievement. Why don't we start with Paul, for the benefit of folks who don't know, and they are out there, what exactly is a superintendent of student achievement?
Well, that is a fantastic question. Superintendent of student achievement role comprises a number of things. We have portfolio responsibilities, both Don and I, that are in the main around secondary. My work is around innovation, Indigenous portfolio, and a number of other portfolios that are too long to list right now. But our big work is how do we serve sort of the learning and student and teacher learning in our system, advance kind of the delivery of education in our system, but also the kind of discovery muscle of our organization as well.
So we always talk about measurables in education. Don, how would a parent know that things are going great for you in your role as a superintendent?
Well, I think they would see from their students' teachers, just as we always would have seen, if things are going well in terms of programming, there's good communication with the parent, there's good communication between the student, the parent, and the teacher about what's happening, why it's happening, what we're learning, what we like about it, what's challenging about it, what it leads to, how it connects in a personal way for the student. I think if the community was peeking through the window at what we're doing here and saying, how is it being successful, I would say that they would be seeing examples of the kind of work we're trying to instill in schools across most of the district, and that there would be teachers trying to engage in this kind of work in every school. Not every teacher all the time in every class, but that there would be opportunities for students and teachers to co-plan and co-learn in this way.
So they'd see opportunities for great teachers to try great things to help students be successful.
Absolutely.
Okay, so it's obvious you guys got great chemistry going on. Let's talk about that path guiding document rethink. How did that all come about for Thames Valley?
We have to give, I think, some significant credit to the director. A few years back, there was a fair bit of conversation about innovation in the district. There was lots of conversation about we're always doing secondary school the way we've always done secondary school. We were pressed by capacity issues in terms of capital planning, use of space, type of programming, equity of access to programming. There are a lot of issues when we just take a look at what our current status was at the time. And Laura Elliott was a real instigator, pioneer in having us rethink what we're doing. And so there did become from that a formal process where we didn't want it just to be the think tank of a few minds at this building, and so there was significant public input over a year and a half period that affirmed for us that we were headed in the right direction. And then following that, we followed a more structured approach about what the big rocks might be within Rethink and who would take charge of each piece, and started to formulate. The document is a culmination of 2 years. It's the second document in the series of work around Rethink.
People might not know as well that Don and Paul, you guys are both teachers by trade.
Absolutely.
I wonder, Paul, as you went on this journey, this Rethink Secondary journey, how do you balance the relationship between the good data that Don talks about and your instincts for student success? Those good instincts you built in the classroom and those good instincts you built as an administrator.
It's a great question, because I think the parallel discourse that was happening in our school district right around the time of Rethink was also, and again, credit to Director Elliott for sort of providing the provocation, was an innovation forum that we held at the convention center, which was a really large open space to sort of posit the question, what can innovation look like in a school district? And out of that came a lot of really interesting feedback from students and parents and community and teachers about, could we reimagine the different structures for delivery of curriculum? Could we imagine different uses of time? Could we imagine subjects being integrated? Could we imagine more choice for students and more voice and more autonomy, both at the school level and at the classroom level and at the teaching level? The kinds of things that sit inside Rethink around responsive teaching and learning, these were the kinds of things that people were bringing forward. So really, April of 2016, we threw out a sort of a provocation of our own around what would it look like if we didn't have subject and periods, and what would it look like if we designed some programming within the confines of the bumper pads, we call them all the time, which are, you've got an Ontario curriculum that has to be met, and it's a key piece. We have collective agreements that are critically important. And then thirdly, like anything, can we imagine doing something that is inside a sustainable delivery model? So not a large money bomb, but rather, look, we're going to give you, here are the bumper pads, but we're not going to throw crap load of money at you to say, but inside the system that you're working in, with the parameters you have, what's possible, and where could that creativity emerge with all of those things under consideration? And what we were surprised by was how quickly the uptake was on that. And that, just inside of the first year, we had some projects that were running 4 credit packages, 2 credit packages, and that was sort of kind of the substance of it. The key part for me, and because the question was a very personal one that you asked, which is, where does the classroom teacher sit in this from my standpoint, is that I think that it was probably deeply woven into where my own headspace was. I mean, obviously I'm playing the role of the supervisory officer in this, but I really did come back to what would be great if I were a teacher today. And I think, I'm sure Don agrees, I don't think we ever have given up our belief that we're still at the core of this, school teachers, and that what inspires me or would inspire me could potentially inspire others. And I think that kind of engagement that we've seen in so many of our educators, and unpacking that creativity that sits there, wow, it's amazing. So I'm getting excited talking about it, because that's really what at the end, what gets results? Well, inspired kids get results, but that starts with amazing teachers given the opportunity to do that. So to me, those were happening. And the parallel stream with the Rethink and School Within a School projects were that those sort of things started to converge. And really, at a certain point, with our work, Don and I, these things were kind of working together. And this, in effect, was sort of the pointy edge of Rethink in a practical application. Rather than writing documents about the possibilities, why can't we do it right now and find out?
Well, I remember sitting down in that convention center, and the stakeholders and teachers and students were throwing out the ideas and topics. You mentioned about just how quickly we were able to put some of those into practice.
Yeah.
And working within those bumper pads. How important was that to take those ideas that we had posted along that wall and just let's see what we can do here?
Well, it in retrospect, it sounded like it was awfully easy, but it was actually.
I would love to hear.
It was a spaghetti mess, is what it was initially, and I think what we had a hard time grabbing was we had all kinds of paper, we had all kinds of, but nobody was necessarily in the room to hear those conversations. So, but we could see themes, and we could see practical application. And I think like anything, and we've all been through this, is, you have a big inspiring kind of event like that, and then the question is, well, 6 months later, where are we? What's going on? So we felt some need to try something. Let's get something going. Let's start somewhere. And I think the fear factor is always, well, maybe we better get more evidence or more information. But I think what innovation would suggest, what discovery would suggest, is that you start somewhere and you try early prototyping, and you fail early. You fail early, and you learn quickly, and then you adapt. And I think that's, in effect what's happened. I mean, the Monday morning quarterback says, well, that was all planned out. But the truth is we were, kind of one play ahead of the thing at half the time, which is kind of the exciting part. But I think being prepared for that kind of flexibility is key.
The first part of that, I think, though, really hung in the balance was a belief that things could be different. And for lots of our employees who have spent their whole careers, in inside structures that do present as barriers, whether it's how we schedule schools or what the time is like, or do I teach by myself, or am I actually teaching in a classroom or in a different place, and all of these things. And I know our colleague who's been really instrumental in this work, Rick Pardo, would say, a group of teachers, when he would talk to them about this, would say to him, don't mess with me. If I can't really do this, just get away from me, because, I really like this, but I don't want to be, tempted if I can't really do things. So those early days where people saw, oh, you're going to really let us do this? I think, really provided some sense of traction, began to build some faith and trust from other teachers, and probably was important to amassing a number of teachers early that were participating in the program.
The magic word I hear buried underneath all of the things that you guys are saying is collaboration. Mm-hmm. You started off in a big collaborative space. You transitioned to a document that was written collaboratively by you guys and your great team. Then you've gone ahead and you've released that trust to great teachers that have collaborated in their buildings, and again done great things for students, which is the name of the game. Don, when you think about what you've learned about collaboration from that first day at the convention center to today with all of the neat things that are happening in our school, what have you learned about collaboration through that journey?
Yes, Don.
Well, I would think right off the top that we all have a different sense of what that is. And it's a term that's easy to toss around. And once people really begin that work, it scares the bejesus out of you. There's a lot of risk. There's a lot of vulnerability, and for colleagues to come together, co-plan, co-teach, co-learn, to know their curriculum well enough that they can work with another colleague and meet expectations through unified projects and inquiry-based work. That takes a lot of courage. And if there's one thing that Paul and I have talked about this, if there's one thing that we've learned is that this is a lot harder in the early goings than perhaps we might have anticipated it to be for teachers to move from what they've always known since they were 5 years old about teaching to doing it in a different way, collaborating with colleagues. And so I mean, we were constantly learning about collaboration and about the pitfalls and when people need supported and when they need someone to chime in. And maybe Paul might mention some of the work in St. Thomas where we had tried a project that wasn't sustainable, and what we learned from that around collaboration. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that. I mean, the big piece for those that entered into this is that it's tiring. It tests you in ways that you've never been tested. And one of the teachers in one of the projects that we've been involved in, she coined the term exhilarosted, and I think that kind of describes a lot of what this is. We throw around terms like collaboration a lot, but we don't necessarily understand fulsome way what those things mean in real time. And one of the things we've talked about is when you're in a real collaboration, like the real kind, it's going to push you and it's going to challenge you, and you've got people that have your back and are in that, but they're going to push you and they're going to challenge you. And that I think sometimes we assume collaboration is the holding of hands and dancing around kind of stuff. Well, this is a little gnarlier, and it pushes us. It forces you to get off your imagining of what subject is and play it out in a broader context. So it's not just the integration of things; it's the reimagining of subject in itself. And I think that's really interesting. And we've learned a few things too, because when we're tested, sometimes our default is to kind of go back to the way we've done it before, because that's a safe place to go. Absolutely. And in some of our earlier projects, that kind of happened a little bit. It hit that gnarly point and went, oh, we better go back, because we all want to make sure that we do the right thing for kids, and we don't want to hurt this. So our default is to go back to the safe recesses of our own little place, rather than re-engage this and go, no, we're gonna wrestle this out, and that to me is what collaboration is. And when I've seen it in these sort of projects, that's what it looks like. But the bond that we're actually doing some going through some interviews that some of our teachers have been through, then talking about that, and that comes up over and over again. Is, wow, what I thought I knew about collaboration is not what I know now. And students say, and this is interesting, students have said, you guys are always talking about collaboration, but this is the first time I've ever seen teachers collaborating, because this is happening right in front of them. And so they're now modeling it. They're modeling problem solving and modeling, when something doesn't go right. There was one of the projects at HBBO with the weather balloon took off on them. Well, that wasn't in the plan, and they had to sort of figure it out. And the beauty of that was the teachers with the kids were going, okay, well, what are we doing now? And that's kind of the way learning. It's a little messy, but as is collaboration.
That was part one of our chat with Don Macpherson and Paul McKenzie.
I know a lot of people listening have read a lot of the things that Paul and Don have written, but it's nice that they get the opportunity to share in their own words how they're feeling about some of the great things that are happening. It's nice to hear that energy and that passion and that enthusiasm for all of the things that are happening for kids all around Thames Valley.
It was also refreshing to hear how they took the data from the convention center, from the big Rethink conference that we had a number of years ago, and they put that into practice. And in particular, they wanted to put some of those ideas into place fairly quickly. I think they gave themselves the timeline of about 6 months to put those things into action.
We're going to hear lots more great stories from Don and Paul next week. In the meantime, Tim, if people want to hear some great stories before next week, how can they do that?
Yeah, feel free to subscribe to the podcast. There are a number of wonderful stories that we have on there of teachers and stakeholders from across the valley putting Rethink into action.
Thanks very much, guys.